In 2019, a team of researchers used a remote-controlled vessel to explore the ocean floor, but stumbled upon something totally unexpected. What they found was incredibly rare and completely by chance: a whale that was falling. Throughout history, humans have only witnessed about 20 of these falling whales, but it's believed that without them falling to the ocean floor, it might have been devoid of living organisms altogether. However, in nature, everything is interconnected, and the whale was given a chance for a second life. Oh, and before I forget, you guessed already, right? Let me remind you unobtrusively, don't forget to hit the like button, all right? So what happened during the exploration of Monterey Bay's seabed? Scientists lowered a vessel underwater to capture footage of an octopus garden and gather readings from various instruments. We mentioned these places in a video some time ago. So let's not dwell on the octopuses, because what the researchers stumbled upon was truly astonishing. Instead of a breeding ground for cephalopods, they witnessed a full-blown feast on the ocean floor around a dead whale. Or more like, what was left of the whale? When the researchers discovered the skeleton, only a portion of flesh and vascular tubes remained on it. Coming across a whale fall is like winning the lottery for scientists and researchers. They hardly ever happen. And the fact that they found one in conditions where they can actually study it makes it even more amazing. They found a whale about 10,000 feet below the surface, not too deep by ocean standards. After examining the remains, scientists figured the animal fell roughly 4 months ago. There was barely any flesh or vascular tissue left. You might be thinking, whales are massive, so finding where they die should be easy, right? Well, not really. Whales are indeed large, but they're still just a drop in the ocean compared to the vastness of the world ocean. Trying to guess where one will kick the bucket and then actually getting there to see it happen is a very challenging task, maybe even impossible. So yeah, scientists got really lucky, especially because they were quick to act. The whale's body was in such a state that it wasn't immediately obvious what species it was just by looking at it, and it's no wonder. All they had was a skeleton. If you didn't know what whale skeletons looked like, you might think they stumbled upon some prehistoric monster. Still, the researchers finished their study and reached some conclusions. It's believed to be a young gray or humpback whale, which are commonly hunted by orcas in this area. They suspect it was a young one because it measured around 13 to 16 feet long, whereas adults of these species can reach up to 45 to 55 feet. But even a whale of this relatively moderate size is enough to impress not just scientists, but also ocean creatures. In this underwater area, hundreds, maybe even thousands of animals have gathered, drawn by the fall of the whale. It's pretty much the whale's only chance to meet creatures living at depths it can't reach. But what exactly is meant by the term whale fall? In simple terms, it goes like this. When a whale dies in the sea, its carcass sinks to the ocean floor and begins to decompose. Just a natural biological cycle, you know? Whale falls are jackpots for deep-sea scavengers because one dead whale becomes a vital food source for a whole ecosystem. It's an important and long-lasting meal, which is essentially at great depths where finding food can be really tough. Sometimes, usually a few days after death, a whale can float on the surface of the ocean or close to it because of gas buildup. However, eventually the carcass, carried by ocean currents, sinks and often lands at great depths, providing deep-sea ecosystems with a concentrated food source. The thought probably never crossed the whale's mind, but it's finding a sort of second life as food for at least 100 different species. And that's just the ones we know of. You know, there are tons of creatures down in the ocean's depths that we haven't even discovered yet. Researchers have determined that up in the northern Pacific Ocean, when whales drop, it's like a buffet for around 12,490 creatures of 43 species. Sometimes over 30,000 organisms can be found on a single skeleton. And they're not in a hurry when it comes to eating. The carcass of a single whale can support an ecosystem for a whopping 100 years. 100 years! That's a whole century of comfortable living for the entire ecosystem. Feasting that follows the death of a whale unfolds in several stages, which isn't surprising given just how huge a whale can be. A blue whale, for example, can weigh up to 200 tons. Can you imagine how much food is in there? It might take quite a while for a whale to fully decompose, and this process happens even slower in colder waters of the deep sea and under higher pressure. In general, the deeper it is, the longer it takes for one whale to decompose. The process of a whale falling to the ocean floor is often broken down into stages, some lasting for months, while others can stretch over years. Scientists have no clue about the duration of certain stages at all. As I mentioned before, it's quite rare for scientists to observe such a process happening in real time. Generally, there are 4 stages, with the first one lasting from a couple of months to up to 5 years. So, a whale is falling to the ocean floor. At that time, scavengers like hagfish, macruidae, and sharks freely feast on the whale's soft tissues. Every bit of the whale, including its generous fat reserves, becomes fair game. Sharp teeth of underwater creatures easily tear flesh from whale bones. Among these scavengers, there may also be giant isopods that burrow into the body. They look like huge beetles you might find in your garden. They're joined by swarms of amphipod scavengers resembling sand fleas. It's quite a sight. Well, not for everyone. The process is natural, but hardly pleasant. It's interesting that without scavengers, whales can stay untouched in the water for years, even decades. This happens really deep down below because sharks simply don't go down there. And without them and other big scavengers, the process doesn't begin. Seems like they're needed to kickstart the first phase, where whale carcasses lose their integrity. Meanwhile, the falling of whales in shallow oceans could wrap up within a year or two. They'll just get eaten up too quickly. But let's get back to our hero. It's believed to be a gray or humpback whale. Gray whales typically stay at around 16 to 49 feet deep, and they occasionally dive down to around 98 to 115 feet. Humpback whales tend to favor deeper waters, swimming at around 260 feet below the surface, occasionally diving to depths of up to 2,000 feet. However, the carcass discovered by scientists was located about 10,000 feet deep, in a place where neither species would have ever ventured during their lifetimes, meaning they would have never encountered creatures living there. Though it's better to avoid some of them altogether. On the other hand, it's at such depths that you might see deep-sea octopuses feasting on those who feast on whales, crustaceans, worms, and mollusks. Next comes the second stage, which lasts from a couple of months to around 2 years. It takes about 2 years for the soft tissues of whale carcasses to fully decompose. Well, the ones that weren't eaten during the first stage. Here, a bunch of bristleworms, crustaceans, and other small organisms jump into the game, feasting on the remains left behind by larger predators. Alongside, all these little creatures make themselves at home on the bones and enrich deposits around where the whale fell. A decomposing whale body enriches the local environment with organic compounds, and small organisms make the most of it. Even after the soft tissues of a whale disappear, their organic components, like cartilage, can continue nourishing the surroundings for months or even years simply by breaking down. At the same time, a whale skeleton becomes a reliable home for invertebrates. From their perspective, a whale's fall is like stumbling upon a well-developed neighborhood with high-end yet affordable housing, and a couple of great supermarkets nearby. How about the third stage? It's the longest known one and could go on for up to 50 years. Take a look at the whale on the seabed. It's the same one I showed you at the beginning of the video. But a year has passed, and the animal has changed a lot. It's fallen apart. Once soft tissues separate from bones, bacteria, worms like ossidax, mollusks, and other organisms break down fats and fatty tissues and bones, producing sulfides that can be consumed by other organisms. Bacteria break apart fats and bones, releasing hydrogen sulfide, which then becomes food for deep-sea mollusks such as mussels and snails. By the way, the name of the worm genus Ossidax means bone-eating in Latin. Quite a fitting name, isn't it? These worms produce acid that dissolves the hard outer layer, then they extend tiny tendrils into the center of the bone. It looks almost like a plant growing roots. These tendrils then eat proteins like collagen, found inside the bone. To Ossidax, these proteins are a means of survival. Oh, here's another funny thing. When the worms penetrate the bones, the crustaceans leave. Then the worms pop back up, which leads to the return of the crustaceans, who eat Ossidax. It's like a back-and-forth battle on whale remains that really amuses scientists. Well, scientists are generally a pretty jolly bunch. But then comes the fourth phase of the whale's fall, and nobody can say how long it lasts. That's partly because we've only been studying whale falls for a few decades, so there's not a lot of data. But scientists think the sturdy mineral skeleton left behind after the nutrients are all absorbed continues to be used by underwater creatures. It's commonly believed that the final stage of a whale's decomposition happens when its bones turn into minerals, creating a solid surface or suspension and filter feeders. These are creatures that feed on tiny floating organisms or organic leftovers, sifting them out of the water. The process of bone colonization can go on for several decades, or until there's no more space left on the bones. Naturally, this isn't something easily noticeable to the naked eye. Like the fact that the whale lost its soft tissues. That's why some scientists break down the falling process into 3 stages instead of 4. The last one takes too long. Even though there's not a lot of research on whale falls, most examples come from the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. But saying most might be a stretch. Whale falls are such a new area of study that all the cases where people have spotted them could easily fit on a map. Pens mark natural fall spots, stars or fossil sites, and boats are where researchers recreated whale falls. You know, all the things we talked about today got me thinking, is a whale's death kinda cool? Hold on, I don't mean I hate whales or anything like that, but the fall of a whale could be like an oasis in the middle of a dry desert, supporting life where it might not otherwise exist. You see, most living things start foraging with a little help from the sun. Algae and plants work their magic through photosynthesis, turning sunlight into their grub. Then animals eat these plants and algae to keep going. Some animals snack on others, you know, the whole food chain thing. It works on land and in water. But here's the kicker. Sunlight doesn't reach the deep ocean floor. It's pitch black down there, which means no photosynthesis. So the food chain gets cut off before it even starts. That's why almost all the food in the deep ocean mostly drifts down from above, gradually sinking thanks to the laws of physics. The number of plants and algae at the bottom isn't enough to support a diverse range of life down there. That's why they need big animals that can bring down a ton of food to those depths. The stuff the bottom typically eats is called marine snow. It's essentially a slow drift of mucus, fecal pellets, and body fragments sinking from above. It's really not much. However, over the course of several weeks of feasting on a dead whale, deep-sea animals consume as much food as they typically get over years or even decades from the usual marine snow. That doesn't sound too healthy, going hungry for so long only to feast on a ton of food later, but in reality, deep-sea creatures just live like that, constantly toggling between famine and feast. They've chosen life at the bottom and adapted to it, with the cold helping to slow down their metabolism. So after gorging on a whale carcass, these deep-sea creatures can go for about a year without eating and still feel great. I kinda envy them, honestly. Let's go back to that map with the places where the whales have fallen. What does it mean by researchers recreating whale falls? Do they actually kill the whales? Of course not. But you see, witnessing a whale's death in the ocean and watching what happens afterwards is practically impossible. It's much simpler to recreate scenarios of falls. Take, for example, back in 2004, when a dead blue whale washed up on the shores of Monterey, California. Scientists saw this as an opportunity. They waited for the tide to rise, lifting the carcass, then attached it to a ship and pulled it out to sea, where they attached a weight to it, and down it went. That's when people really began learning about whale falls in detail. Pretty much what I told you today. While studying whales by watching them sink may seem fascinating for science, it's often impractical due to various reasons. Transporting a whale carcass is tricky, not to mention finding one in the first place. That's why some scientists turn to substitutes, like alligators, to study deep-sea feeding processes. They actually take dead reptiles, haul them out to the open sea, tie them to weights, and then drop them. How about dropping dead cows to the ocean floor? It's the same idea here: animal carcass, ocean, weights. It's the only way to study the fall since whales are so rare. Now, since we're all here at the end of the video together, give it a thumbs up. See you later.